Hello and welcome to this video. In today's video I'm going to be showing you how to make an asteroid spawner script. In the script you'll see that we'll have these areas that we can define within Unity, and it'll spawn in asteroids which have an LOD system applied, so you can see as we fly out they become lower poly. If we click them you can see this is using LOD02. As we get closer you can see, you might not be able to see, but it did pop into its lower resolution version. You can see that they're not using gravity, so they're floating around in space. If we bump into them in our ship, we can knock them, send them flying. And you can see that as we fly over, we can shoot the asteroids. And then they'll eventually explode into sort of a cloud of particles. If you want to have access to those asteroid models, you can go over to the Patreon. This post will be linked in the description below. If you come over to the free resources to use in tutorials post, again, I'll link it in the description below. And you can click through to that, and then there's an asteroid folder. You can just download the asteroids and we'll use them a bit later on in the video. Whilst you're over on the Patreon, if you do want to subscribe, that'd be very much appreciated. You do get access to all of my tutorial projects so far, including the Blender tutorials and also my Unity engine tutorials. So you can see that we've got quite a lot of projects over here, all the different parts. So if any project that I've done a tutorial on, the project files for that are here. And you can see there's a lot to get stuck into already, and it is growing sort of, and with every video I put out, it is growing, so this is becoming a bigger resource. But yeah, no pressure. If you want to do it, that'd be really handy, really great, and I'd very much appreciate it. And a big shout out to my Patreons currently. That's Vincent, Andres, Reese, Sizor, and Squidmaker. Thank you very much for subscribing. But with all that said, let's just jump straight into the video. Okay, so with the last place that we left this was that we could shoot. And we could shoot our lasers, and we could fly around and boost. Our lasers could shoot out. So what we said we'd do next is that we would add in some asteroids to shoot at. So to get some asteroids spawning, I mean, you could place them all manually. What's going on here? Our laser. Let's just set our lasers to 0, 0. Okay, so if we get an empty game object, and we'll just call this our asteroid spawner. And I'm just going to zero this out. So that's there. And then we'll add a new component. We'll add a new component, which is an asteroid spawner script. So the first thing we're going to want to do is we want a public game object array. And we'll call this our asteroid objects. And then we want a public int, which is our amount of asteroids to spawn. We'll set this to 10 for now. And then we want a public float, which is our minimum random spawn position. So we'll do minimum random spawn. We'll do this equal to 500. And then we want a max random spawn, and we'll set this to 500. So on our start method, we're going to want to, for every kind of asteroid we want to spawn, we are going to pick a random place to spawn it, and we'll plop it in. We'll spawn it into the world. So to do that, we're going to need a for loop, and I'm just going to wrap this in a spawn asteroid method, just so if we do want to expand on our asteroid spawner script later on, we can do, and we can keep it a bit tidy. Do it as you mean, code as you mean to go on, as it were. So I'm going to do for int I equals 0, and whilst I is less than the amount of asteroids to spawn, I++. So then the first thing we want to do is we're going to choose our random spawn point, and this is going to be equal to a new vector 3. And we're going to take our current transform.position.x, and we are going to add to that our random x value, which is something that we're going to which we'll set up in a second. And then we are going to want to do transform.position.y, and then do our plus our random y position, and then we'll do our transform.position.z, and this is going to be equal to our random z position. So we'll come up here and we'll do float random x, and we'll set this to a random dot range between our minimum random spawn and our max random spawn. And then we can just duplicate this twice, and we'll do random y, random z. So this is our random spawn point here. And then what I'll do is we're going to create a game object called temp obj, and we're going to instantiate. For now, I'm just going to do asteroid objects 0, so the index 0 in our array that we've made up here. Because for this example, I'm only going to pop one asteroid model in. But obviously you could put multiple asteroid objects in and then just pick a random one between the index there, so you could do that. But I'm just going to go for index 0, and I'm going to set this at our random spawn point, and I'm going to do it at quaternion.identity. And the reason we're storing this in a temp obj is so we can do dot transform dot parent. And we can set this to equal to this transform. So we're going to instantiate a asteroid from our array, and I'm just going to do it at index 0, so it'll be the first one in the array. We're going to spawn it at our random spawn point, and we're also going to spawn it with just quaternion.identity, which is it'll be the prefab's default rotation. So we don't need to kind of give it a separate rotation. And then we're going to set that to, we're going to set its parent to the spawn object, just so we can keep our scene hierarchy clean. Because you can imagine if we ended up spawning sort of like 50 asteroids, that would be 50 asteroids just in the list here, and it'd get really messy. So we won't do that. Instead, we'll parent them to this asteroid spawner object. And just so we can see the size of the cube, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a void on draw gizmos, and we'll do gizmos dot draw wire cube, and we'll pass in the center of this cube as our transform position. And then we want to do a new vector 3. And this is the extent of the cube, so we want to take our max random spawn and times this by 2, and we want to do this in the x, y, and z as well. So 2 max random spawn times 2. So if our maximum random spawn is 500, then the extent is going to go 500 on the x one direction, and it'll be 500 in the opposite direction. This is only going to work like this. This will only work like this if you keep these the same value. So max random spawn's 500 or 600 or 700. Your minimum random spawn would have to be negative that number. That's just something to keep in mind using this. If you had sort of like a flat box, it wasn't a full cube, you'd probably want to draw the Y cube differently. But for now, we'll keep it like this, and we'll go back in. Oh, I was wondering why I couldn't see the gizmos. It's because gizmos is checked off here. So you can see this is our asteroid spawning cube. If we just move that along here. So within this cube, we're going to spawn 10 asteroids. It's quite big, so let's just shrink this down. And something that I would probably keep in mind and do is if you want to have quite a large area of asteroids, instead of having one large asteroid spawner, kind of like one huge cube, what you'd probably want to do is have multiple ones. So then you can check the distance between that cube and the player, and then you could always disable the game object. And then because we've parented the asteroids, they'll disappear as well. That's just an optimization thing, because there's no point showing and simulating all the asteroids within the cube if the player can't see it or isn't anywhere near it. So you could do a raycast from the player's position to the asteroid spawner, and if it's obscured by sort of like a space station or something, then you could set it to inactive, and that'll just help with performance. But I'll just delete this asteroid spawner duplicate. And we've got our box here. So let's just double check this is working. So I'm going to come into my prefabs folder here, and then I'll create an empty object, and I'm just going to call this our asteroid. And again, I'm just going to zero this out. For now, I'll add in a sphere to this, just as a temporary kind of like asteroid model. Maybe scale this up sort of like 10, have it kind of pointed, or just a little bit squished. There we go. And I'm going to drag my asteroid into our prefabs folder, and then I'll delete it from the scene, come back to our spawner, and under asteroid objects, I'll just add my asteroid in. We will later on, there'll be a link in the description below to download an asteroid model that we can use for this scene. I'll swap that in later, but we just want to make sure everything's working first. So now, if I go ahead and hit play, see that over here in our asteroid script, we have spawned in 10 asteroids. We could spawn in sort of 30, spawn them in. So here's our asteroids. They will overlap, but we're going to add rigid bodies to them later. So on spawning, if they are overlapping, the collisions will be pushed out anyway, because we want them to be floating around, because they are sort of 0G. So we can do that now, because we also want to be able to destroy them as well. So on our prefab here, let's add in a asteroid script, not asteroid spawner. We'll make a new script called asteroid, and we'll clear that for now while we just get some variables in. So the first thing I want to do is I want to do a require component type of rigid body. And then we can do rigid body, RB, and then on our awake function, sorry, my spelling's awful, it's because my microphone's blocking my keyboard and it's kind of, I'm losing the line of sight for my typing. So we'll do RB equals get component rigid body. And the first thing I want to do is I want each asteroid to kind of vary in size. Just slightly. So, well, obviously, the more asteroid models you have kind of in your array, the more variation you'll get for players to experience. But as well as the models, in other ways, you can sort of squish them slightly, make them just ever so slightly different in scale, and that will allow you to get a lot more for less kind of individual meshes, if that makes sense. So we'll do float random scale, and we'll do this between a random.range, let's say between its normal scale of 1 and maybe 3f. And then we'll do transform.local scale is equal to vector3.1 times our random scale. And then after getting our rigid body, what we want to do is we want to do rb.use gravity is equal to false, because obviously we're in space. And then we can do rb.add force, and we can do vector3.forward times our force vector free dot forward times by, we'll do initial force, which is a float we'll make in a second. And we can do the same with add torque. And we'll do initial torque. So we could do a public float initial force. We'll set this equal to 10F. And then we'll do initial torque. And we'll leave that at 10 as well. We'll tweak these in the inspector. Let's change the scale before we start messing with the rigid body. So let's just make sure this is all working. So if we go back to Unity, so we should see that when we add in our, when we hit play in our Asteroids Spawning, they'll have a rigid body added to them, and they'll be given an initial bit of force and torque just to make them start spinning. So we'll hit play. So you see now, if we go down, it's very subtle, but if we look at the actual asteroid, you can see that it is moving, kind of floating around. So we could maybe, on our prefab asteroid, just to show this kind of is an extreme, hit play. See that they're all sort of going off and spinning around. Obviously you don't want them to go that fast, so maybe we'll set that back to 10 and 10. Another thing you could do is here, for the initial force and torque, you could have a minimum initial force and a minimum initial torque, and then pick a random force and a random torque and add that so they all spin at different rates. When you've got multiple models and a low sort of initial force and initial torque, it shouldn't matter too much anyway. So the next thing we want to do is we want to be able to destroy them. Now what we'll do is we'll spin this out into its own component for our asteroid, because you may have like crates or other ships or something in the world that you want to be damaged. You could do this through an interface. But I'm just going to have a simple health component. So we'll do a new script called health component. And it's just going to need a public float health variable. And we'll set this equal to 100F. And then a public void take damage method. And this will be float damage. And we're going to take our health and we're going to minus the damage from it. And then if our health is now less than or equal to 0, we want to destroy this dot game object. And then in our onDestroy method, we can say instantiate destruction particles, play explosion sound. You can do whatever you want once this object has been destroyed. If you want to do a different thing per object, what you could do is you could make a new script and derive, instead of from monobehavior, you could then do like a asteroid health component. So this could be public class asteroid health component, and it could derive from this class. And then in that case, you'd want to do a private virtual void on destroy. So then you could override it in another script. So let's do that actually. Why don't we do that? So I'm just going to cut this here. We'll go back into our script. And we'll do create C# script, and this one will be our asteroid health component. And this is going to derive from our health component. And we'll do a private virtual void on destroy. So we'll do a protected virtual void on destroy. And then in our asteroid health component, we can do a protected override on destroy. So we've not got anything in here at the moment. So when it calls base on destroy, nothing will happen other than like its mono behavior stuff that's automatically called. But what we want to do is we can instantiate our destruction particles and play the explosion sound here. And we'll probably do that before the base on destroy stuff. And again, if we wanted to, we could do a public virtual void take damage. And we could override that as well, just in case we want to. So we'll do public override void take damage. And in this case, we won't do anything different. We will just do the normal sort of take damage effect. So we go back to Unity now. Go back to our prefabs, and we have our asteroid here, and we can add a component, and we'll add the asteroid health component with a health of 100. And let's tag it as an asteroid as well. The reason for this is that when we shoot it with our lasers, we can check whether what we're hitting is an asteroid through its tag. So we'll tag it as an asteroid, and then we'll go back to our ship, spaceship shooting script. So in our fire laser script here, we say if our target info is target in range, and it is our shootable thing, that we're going to instantiate the laser hit particles at the hit info dot point. We can also create a method called apply damage. I'll stick this up here for now. Void apply damage. And this is going to take in a health component. Health component. So apply damage, we can do if hit info dot get dot collider dot get component health component, then we can pass in said health component to our apply damage, and then we can do health component dot take damage and pass in our laser damage variable, which we haven't created yet. So our laser settings. Actually, we've got mining power here. I'm just going to rename this to laser damage for now. It's probably easier. So take damage, pass in our laser damage, and we're going to want a serialized field, private float, time between damage application, because otherwise we'll apply one damage a frame, and you'd rinse everything. You want it to be kind of done over time. You want it to either be sort of applied over time or have it sort of damage the asteroids or whatever it is you're shooting in intervals, which is the method we'll take. So we'll say that every 0.25 seconds, so every quarter of a second, we can then apply our damage. And then we don't need this serialized. We can do a private float, current time between damage application. It's quite long. Application. So handle laser firing is happening in update. So while we're applying our damage, we can say current time between damage application equals time dot delta time. And then we say if current time between damage application is greater than our time between damage applications, then the health component can take damage, and we'll set our current time between blah 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 to 0. And then just to make sure this is working, I'm just going to put some debug.log. So debug.log, and this will just say applying damage to health component dot game object dot name. And I'm just going to copy the debug.log, go into our take damage function on our health component, and then we can say taking damage. I'm actually going to do this. So taking damage, new health at health. And we'll need to make sure this is below our health after the damage. So, okay, so that wasn't working. Let's see what's going on here. So, we're saying equals time.delta time. So we need to plus equals time.delta time. So let's try that again. Okay, so you can see this working here now. So we're shooting it, we're spawning the particles, and it's taking damage. And eventually, once it's let's just up the sort of damage here so that we destroyed it. We can destroy this one up here, so we'll start shooting it. And at the moment, it just pops out of existence once it runs out of health. And the issue I was having is because this was get component. We needed to use get component in parent. So that was what that issue was there. And obviously, you want to make sure it's on the shootable mask. So this is all working, so we can get rid of these debug.logs. So now let's implement some actual asteroid models. So if you go to the link in the description, you'll be able to download these asteroid models, which I've got here. And I created these in Blender, and they've got LODs as well. So the further away you are from them, the lower poly they get. So that'll kind of help with performance as well. And as well as the asteroid models, we've got I've provided some textures for them as well. So once you import them, you want to make sure that the normal map you convert to normal map. And then if we drag in, if we make a new material, so create material, and we'll call this asteroid. So on here, we want to drag the base color into base map, the normal map into normal map, and you want to drag mask into mask and also into metallic map. And you can see our asteroid here with it applied. And you can see what I mean with the LOD. So this is LOD 0. This will apply. You can see how far away the camera is. And as we go back, it will drop to the LOD 1, LOD 2, and LOD 3 the further away. And then once you get to the sort of this percent, it just culls it completely. And you can also have set the fade mode to crossfade. And what we want to do here for these LODs, you can see that as we go out, it loses its texture. So the way to solve that is if we go into our asteroid prefab on the import settings, we can drag in our asteroid material. We'll do that for each of these. We'll do that for each of these models. And now you can see that as we fly away, now you can see as the camera goes away, and it swaps to the lower LODs, the textures stay the same. So yeah, the link for these are in the description below. So now what you want to do is on your prefab here, if we open up our asteroid, so instead of this horrible sphere, we can now go to our assets, models, asteroid, and we'll drag in asteroid 01. So you can see that here. So now when we hit play, you can see that the asteroids spawn in, they're spinning around with the 0 gravity, and they have their materials applied. And as you fly away, they do get lower poly. As you get closer, they kind of load in. So this is the sort of higher resolution one. Will go away. It'll swap over to its lower LOD. So you can see it's now at LOD2. And there's one final thing. Let's just add some asteroid particles. So this is when the asteroid gets destroyed, we can spawn in some particles just to kind of mask it slightly. It's not going to be perfect. This isn't a particle tutorial. But if we add a new empty called asteroid particles, and then we can come to our particle system. Under renderer, we can choose mesh. And if we choose in our meshes, click the little button here, we'll do asteroid. And because they're only going to be small particles, we can use one of the LODs. So the asteroid 5 LOD2, why not? And then in material, we'll choose our asteroid material. In shape, instead of cone, we can have sphere. We don't want it to loop, and we want it to be quite quick, so we'll have a duration of 1. Start speed, we'll have 20. Let's see what that looks like. Emission, we don't want them over time. We want a big burst of them as they explode. We want, obviously, gravity modifier to be 0. We'll bring down the start size slightly, so to 0.4. I'm going to increase the speed a bit more to 30 to give it a bit more of an impact. And then what we could do is we could do size over lifetime of our curve here. We could just have them shrink sort of over their lifetime. So they'll come out and then they'll fade away. We want them to probably come out the size, like their actual size. So you see that they should fade away kind of nicely. So in our prefabs, I'm just going to zero out our prefab and then drag in our asteroid particles. In our asteroid script, asteroid health component, what we could do is we could do a public game object destruction particles, and then instead of having this comment, we can say if destruction particles. So if it's not null, then we have actually assigned some. Let's instantiate them at our transform.position with quaternion.identity. And then let's just make sure that we destroyed the particles after, say, 2F. Let's just make sure that we instantiate them and then they clean themselves up afterwards. So in our asteroid here, we can drag in our asteroid destruction particles. And we'll go to play. Let's just find an asteroid over here to shoot and destroy. Get in our ship. And we'll shoot the asteroid, and it doesn't work because we need to add a collider to our asteroid. I'll do a mesh collider, convex, and then for the mesh, so this is asteroid 01. Asteroid 01. And I'm going to use one of the lower LOD meshes for the mesh collider, because we don't need the fully detailed one. We could just have the normal one here. We could have the low poly one here. Make sure convex is set. Make sure we tag it as an asteroid and put it on the shootable layer. Okay, so now if we hit play, we're probably going to be here a while thinking about it. Let's have a look. 676L. So I'm just going to make the damage of the laser a bit stronger, so we're not here for ages. You can shoot it, it'll blow up, and then it'll spawn in its destruction particles. So there you have it. There is our asteroid spawner and our asteroid destruction script. If you wanted to take this a bit further, you could have a sort of mineral class, for example. So you could have some like iron that spawns in when it's destroyed, and then the player can pick up the iron, and you can use that then in any sort of like crafting systems or whatever you've implemented into your game. But that's it for now. I hope this was useful and a good sort of follow along in addition to this tutorial. As I said, these asteroid models are available at the link in the description below. That's it for now. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one. Bye!